Welcome to an SAT writing video, and in this video it is actually the second part of the two pair of videos where I'm looking at grammatical conventions. This video is only questions. The previous one was the theory that went behind it. Namely, we covered the things that you can see in the screen in front of you right now, some more things, namely parallelism, being concise, the preference given to an active voice, and the importance of being the importance in being specific, the importance given to being specific. And if you haven't seen the previous video, I highly recommend you do, because these questions are almost entirely based on things that I talk about in the previous video. Unless you already know those things, then we'll proceed and you can answer the questions. So as I come to my first question, I really think you should pause the video, answer it, and do that for each of the 10 questions I have over here, and try to solve it yourself. Try to think about why you're choosing that option, and then you can of course click the play button and see how far it matches up, right? So question number 1, a virtual receptionist is increasingly preferred by organizations as a virtual receptionist saves costs, it requires no breaks, and maintains a professional image, right? So immediately something I should realize is that this extra it disrupts the flow. So we just have maintains, we just have saves here. This extra it is kind of breaking, it's kind of disrupting the sentence. It does not follow what we would expect under parallelism, and therefore you'd almost immediately think that a better option would be one that did not have the it, so it would just go seamlessly. So saves cost, requires no breaks, and maintains a professional image. We see that option is right there, and therefore we could go to D. Just for anyone wondering why it is requires and not required, this is because a virtual receptionist is a singular identity, and therefore it is paired with requires and not require. Question number 2, before I answer this question, I really want to stress on how important practice is for the writing section. Do as many practice tests as you can, do as many questions as you can, because writing is something that the writing session is something that only gets better with practice. I did 8 practice tests in my week of revision, and I did a couple of more questions from here and there. So ideally, the quantity of practice does matter. So if you don't think you can pull off as many practice tests in a week, definitely take 2 weeks, a month. But really, that is the volume of work you have to do. When I said I took a week, it was an intensive week of preparation. It's just imperative that you practice all the 8 sample tests on the College Board website. I had a book that had 4 more, so I did those as well, and it is a lot of work. And but it is and plan your time according to your existing schedule. I was doing a lot of things, so I decided it was best that I condense all of that and did it in 1 week. But if you have fewer things to do and have a freer schedule, by all means, please take more time, right? With that said, 50% of the stamps in his collection originate from Asian countries. Now, in the last video, I did say that when we're talking about this question is clearly one of singular and plural agreement, and it is 50% of the stamps originate from Asian countries. We're looking at 50% is the entity over here, and we said that a proportion or a percentage takes the singular plural nature from the nearest noun, that is stamps, and therefore it is originate and not originates, and therefore the option actually is correct, because 50% takes the plural nature from stamps, and 50% of these stamps originate from Asian countries. That is correct. We move on. So sometimes you will have text in your question, so you'll have an actual question rather than just the options, and in this case always read the question. So here they're asking which option is most consistent with the style and the content of the information provided between the parentheses after protein. So when we're reading the sentence, we will notice that protein for cell development and growth, right? So the thing in the brackets here is providing extra information about protein's purpose, right? Similarly for vitamins, we're talking about that we're saying that vitamins help prevent deficiency diseases, but for minerals it just says inorganic ions, which is not providing you with the purpose of minerals. So therefore the answer over here would be something that provides you the purpose for minerals. That is option C. So that is the answer, and we can move on. Also, another quick note over here, always read the full sentence and the full question. I didn't read the full sentence over here in the interest of time and because of the fact that I made these questions, so I do know what the question says, what the sentence we're looking at says. Number 4, in the upcoming election, the main point of contention will be the disputable and highly controversial ACC policy. This is again one of the examples where you do need to have a fairly good vocabulary. Something you should realize is that a point of contention, disputable and highly controversial all say the same thing, that the policy was debatable, that the policy was controversial, which means this is a question checking whether you know how to make a sentence concise, and therefore you would just choose option B, the ACC policy, because point of contention already clarifies that the policy we're talking about over here is controversial and disputable, right? So here we're looking at brevity and we're not losing clarity at the same time, so it is option B. Question 5, the success of this treatment is subject to a number of conditions, right? So this is something that these are just some things you should know generally. Like when we are trying to say it is dependent on something, we generally say it is subject to. We not use we just use subject. We do not make it subjected. We do not make it will be subjected. We do not make it subjects, because when we are talking about it being dependent on a number of conditions, the common form and the form we put it in is option C, right? And it just basic things like this, it is important to know. And sometimes why I've included this actually is that because often you might get flustered and you might not remember, you might not recall it at that point, that yes, when we use it in this context, we are always using subject to rather than a subject to or whatever, and therefore it is always a very good idea to read the sentence aloud and read it with the options placed within the sentence, and just looking at which one sounds right. That is an excellent indicator when it comes to approaching these type of questions. Number 6, the use of ammonia as weapons are outlawed. Now, ammonia is a singular entity, so it has to be as a weapon. The use is also a singular entity, therefore it has to correspond with is and not are, and therefore it should be the use of ammonia as a weapon is outlawed, and therefore the option is C. It is a question of singular plural agreement. There are tons of these questions in the SAT writing session. By tons I mean usually about 8 at least, and therefore it is very important that you understand singular plural agreement, and your understanding improves exponentially with practice. It is very important to do each one of the practice tests on the College Board website, each one of the practice tests in a book if you have bought one, in any book if you have bought one, and each question you can find, right? It is imperative. 7, as a child, Mr. X envisioned a day when he could treat patients, right? Now over here, this is one of the questions where it might not be so clear what they're testing. What they're like, you don't know what kind of what grammatical convention are they testing. Are they looking at brevity? Are they looking at wordiness? I've just given you the answer there, but or because I've repeated a word that means the same thing twice. But it is one of the questions where you might not be too sure about what they want you to change, right? And I forgot to underline it, but we are looking at the underline section will be envisioned until up till patience. So Mr. X. So what we can do in this is once again replace the options in the underlined part, which is this, which was supposed to be this, and see which one sounds right. So Mr. X envisioned a day where he would treat patients. Now a day is a time, and therefore when is correct, B is wrong, so A is a better option. So this existing option is better than B. Mr. X hoped that one day he would treat his patients. One day he would treat patients. It is pretty similar, so let's just say both the existing statement and C works. And D says Mr. X aspired to become a doctor. Now this is a much more is a better way of saying this. It is concise. It is short, and it does not result in a loss of clarity of this sentence, and therefore D is a good option because of brevity. Question number 8, as we are drawing closer to the end of this video. The landslide electoral victory evidenced the rising discontent amongst the middle class. We're trying to change the rising discontent amongst. So in option B says the rising discontent between. Between is wrong because we're looking at when we're saying one group, we say amongst the members of the group, not between. But between is more when there are two things. So between the two groups, there was rising content between the two groups. But when we're talking about within a class, when we're talking about within one group, amongst is generally a better word for most contexts. Was evidenced the fact that there was rising discontent. Now the fact just makes it increases the number of words. That is something we do not like, so it's not C. Evidence discontent the middle class, that just does not make sense. So that straight up does not make sense, and therefore we can say that A, no change, is the right answer. 9. The construction of the pyramids was a challenging task. It required materials to be transported across hundreds of miles, right? Now this is sometimes you might think this is sometimes you might immediately say that that the existing text is correct and be tempted to not read the options and just select no change. Never do that, because sometimes we're just the truth is that most documents, most of the news reports you read, most of the media that comes to us, and most of the pieces you probably write, the conventions, the mannerisms, and the short forms you use to speak, if you do that, most of the time they do not follow grammar conventions to the letter, and therefore you often will overlook certain things. So although most of us do use dignified grammar, it is very common for even the most proficient of writers who rarely make a mistake to think a certain sentence is grammatically correct to the letter when it might not, when there might be a better way to do it, a better way to write the same sentence. So always read the other options is what I'm trying to say if I had to be concise. The construction of the pyramids was a challenging task. It required materials to be transported across hundreds of miles. The pyramids was a challenging task, requiring materials to be transported across hundreds of miles. Now see, when I read that loud versus when I read it required, I notice that there is a break here. The transition is sort of, using the ing form of the verb provides a much better transition over here, and therefore I know that B is the correct option. This is something to do with modifiers, and I really recommend you honestly do have a look at tenses separately. It's not something I'm going to be covering in any of my videos explicitly, but it is something that is very rudimentary and to the entire language as such, and it is fundamental that you know it, and therefore I highly recommend, if you have not been speaking English for a long time, if you haven't been writing in English for a long time, if you haven't been conversing in English for a long time, you really need if English is a foreign language to you, as in it has not been your medium of instruction for a really long time, you really need to learn sentences by itself. Also, spam emails are annoying. It's annoying when I get notifications for things. I'll block them anyway. Regardless, so over here, why it's important? Why it is important to read. It is important to read the sentence aloud over here, because if you're an experienced speaker, you'll almost always be able to tell which one sounds right and which one doesn't by reading it aloud, and that is essentially one very easy way to find that B was the better answer relative to what was given in the text. And finally, I've included this this is not a question, but I've included these three different pairs of sentences to illustrate an important point. When we're looking at questions about tense, it is very important that you have context, so you should look at the previous sentence, because just let's read through this. Recently, a number of countries have pledged to invest more in renewable energy over the next 10 years. Such efforts, although beneficial, will be insufficient to combat global warming. If the previous sentence is mildly notice how the final sentence is always the same, right? But what is placed before the word insufficient is changing based on the previous sentence. So so here we're talking about that these countries are planning to have pledged to spend this money in the future, right? And therefore the word we are using will be, right? In the second sentence though, we are seeing that a number of countries have already pledged over across the last 10 years, right? So it is an event that has happened in the past, and therefore we have changed it to have been such efforts have been insufficient, right? We have changed what tense the word be is in. We have changed the tense over here based on the previous sentence, so it corresponds with the previous sentence. So sometimes the previous sentence gives you context as to what the answer should be, and over here if we were saying that today these countries are pledging to invest more in renewable energy, so they're currently doing that, we change it to are, right? So it fits better with the last sentence. So notice how here we have only been changing the last sentence, only been changing the first sentence, but it does have significant ramifications over the tense we use in the second sentence. And therefore, when we're answering questions regarding tense, it is a good idea to read the line. If you're answering any other question, it is a good idea to read the whole sentence for the question in order to answer the question. And in the next video, we're going to look at questions about suitability. So you often see questions like, what is a suitable introduction? What is a suitable conclusion? What is a suitable example? And things like that. And that's what we're going to look at in the next video. With that, thank you. Have a great day. See you.